Okay, let me call to session, the first open session. The first open session of the regular board, of this special board meeting of the Board of Directors of the United Water Conservation District is hereby called to order. The purpose of this first open session is now pursuant to code, government code 54957.7, those matters which would be discussed in executive session into which we'll adjourn in a few moments. Council, please announce those matters to be discussed in executive session, Exhibit A attached to the agenda, posted in accordance with Government Code 54954.2.
Thank you, Mr. President. Actually, it's right on the agenda itself. We don't have an Exhibit A. So today, being a special meeting agenda, the items are listed right there. It's items 2.1A, B, and C, and 2.2. Consisting of districts 2015-2016 groundwater extraction charge, rate-making process, and adoption of groundwater charges for 2015-2016. So those will be the items for closed session. I anticipate it will be a relatively brief, if I may, closed session. The second open session, as the public will see, is scheduled to begin at 8:15 a.m.
Okay, public comments. Are there any questions or comments from anybody regarding matters to be discussed in executive session? Okay. With that, there being no comments, I hereby adjourn this meeting of the board to executive closed session. The board will reconvene to open session at approximately 8:15. Hold on, gentlemen. Immediately following the conclusion of the executive session, we'll make any necessary disclosures of any actions taken during executive session pursuant to Government Code 54957.1, 54957.5.
And Mr. President, right, okay.
Okay.
And there were no public comments.
There were no public comments.
So.
Okay. Okay, let me open up the second open session. Please rise for a pledge of allegiance.
Mr. Robert, you want to lead us? Please put your hand over your heart and follow me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Okay, we have item 3.1, public comments. It's an informational item. Anybody have any items they want discussed with the board that are not on the agenda?
We need a bigger boardroom, man.
Do you know where we can find one?
Yeah. Could you make some suggestions where we should relocate to? Thanks, Craig. Craig sat on this board when we were in the smaller office, and then we moved to this office, and he's still not happy because the size is not right. So.
Actually, the other boardroom was bigger than this.
Yeah, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, but we didn't have video.
Okay, item 3.2, oral report regarding executive session, please.
No action to report, Mr. President.
Okay, 3.3, proposed budget workshop. It's a motion item. Mike.
Okay, I'll start us off. First of all, let me just introduce, as you know, a budget workshop, you're not here to make decisions today as far as authorizing any expenditures. All we're here to do today is to educate everybody a little bit more on the budget document, the proposed budget you received on May 1st for the 15-16 fiscal year. We're going to try to go through it because we know you've read it, looked through it, but we want to help you understand it more and to have the opportunity to ask questions. All the department managers are here. As we go along, if you have a question that's burning inside of you, we'll try, and you need an answer, then we'll answer it. But we'll be recording your comments, questions, and we'll try to respond toward the end so we can keep the thing flowing. We'll keep track of that. As you can see, we have video cameras in here and a court reporter for the administrative record. The video, as the board has directed us to put it on our website after. For those people that can't attend the meeting, they can get on the website. It'll be posted later this afternoon on the website, and people can go in and hear what we have to say today. So it'll be helpful for those. That's why we don't need a bigger room anymore, Chris. What I would start off with you is the budget we are going to discuss today, as far as the numbers and everything, are not going to reflect the May 1st proposed budget that I gave you. Instead, they will reflect revisions that I'm recommending. We've talked a little bit about the Santa Felicia Dam passage. That cost is going up, and we had to adjust that. But more importantly, and you received a letter from me, and there's a copy of the memo out here. If you'll all remember, the board members, and I say this very respectfully to all of you, when I submitted the proposed budget to you, the only recommendation I gave was for the Freeman diversion, the Freeman Fund, the zone fund rate increase to go up, because there we've been dumping a lot of money into dealing with the ESA, and we were running short on the reserves. On the general fund, I didn't do it for one main reason, and we're going to talk about the budget process quite a bit. As you know, I'm very passionate about this job, and I'm very aware of the staff's workload. And we had plenty on our plate with the budget I was proposing to you, and when the board recommended that we still do a rate increase for Zone A, because we want to start building up the money for the projects, we took it back and we did exactly what you said. But since that was done, I've sat down with all the managers again, and what's clear to me is we have too much on our plate. We could do the rate increase, we could put the money in there, but we're not going to spend it. And so with the budget that I'm recommending to you that we're going to talk about today, we've removed the 10% increase, 9.94 that we have noticed. Now, you can't make it, we're not asking you to make a decision on that today, but what I'm asking you is at the June hearing, whether we get a written protest majority or not, I'm asking and recommending that you not approve a Zone A increase. The way I've dealt with it is to reduce funding for 3 projects, CIP projects, the Farrell project, the connection to the Freeman, the PMF, Santa Felicia Dam PMF, and the Santa Felicia Outlet Works. While those are high priority projects, we've left money in there. We left enough money in there to keep Jim and his folks busy, but not insane. Because we're driving people and saying, I get a monthly report from our payroll person showing me our leave time, our accrued leave time. All my managers are maxing out. We can't even take vacations anymore. When we do take vacations, I took a 2-day vacation recently, and before I even got to Palm Springs, I had 3 emails from Jane and 2 from Tony saying be on the phone 9 o'clock the next morning. From 9 o'clock until 6:30 that night, I was either on the phone or emails, and it's just not healthy. We're maxing out our vacation, and people just can't even enjoy a vacation anymore. So I am recommending and we've talked about the staffing issues here. We don't have enough for all the stuff we're going on, and so I respectfully am asking you to reconsider that Zone A increase. We need the Zone B to keep working because we have to move the ESA forward. We have enough work on our plate, though, and enough money left in these projects to keep going. So, again, the budget that we're going to talk about will tie to, the numbers won't tie to this document, they'll tie to this document, plus or minus the recommendation, the revisions we'll talk about during this. Tina will talk about later. So is that clear? And I do that very respectfully, but I hope you know that after 18 years, I know the staff and I know the workload, and you can only force somebody down underwater so many times before they give up to stop fighting back up. So with that, we'll go to my next item. As I mentioned, the Zone B rate increase we need to continue moving forward with. What I'm going to do initially is I'm going to go through very quickly, hopefully in about 20 minutes, what I did last year to talk about the budget process, our compliance with generally accepting accounting principles and GASB. I'm going to fly through the water code. You have a copy of all my presentations. You have a copy of all the presentations that Tina and I will talk about as far as the actual budget we want you to consider. You have copies of HF&H's letter and their staff report, in their PowerPoint presentation. You have Rod Smith letter and his presentation. I would ask you as we go through it, if you have questions or comments, just write notes there, and at the end we can go through them all at once so we can keep moving. The goal of this workshop is mainly this. When we're done, hopefully we've answered all your questions or clarified anything for you or the public of what we're trying to accomplish. At the end, after you hear comments from your fellow board members, the public, give us direction. Are you happy with the budget we're now proposing to bring to you in June to make a decision? Do you have something in there that's burning you that says, I want to add this to the budget or I want to take this out? Give us that direction so that from this moment till the June board meeting, we can make those revisions or do any analysis you need so that we're ready to prepare for that. Is that clear? Anything else? Okay. So with that, we're going to go through very quickly. I would say to you, I said it last year, this is my last budget. This is my 18th budget, actually my 35th budget, but 18th here. The process that I started when I first got here, it's very much the same. The detail.
Can we turn the lights down?
Yeah, okay. The PowerPoint presentation I'm going to go through again, you have copies of, and we try to make it so you have places to make notes. They're available to the public if they want them afterwards. I'll be glad to provide them. Again, 18 years we've been doing very much the same process. Each department going through, looking through their specific needs. We have a very intricate and detailed chart of accounts. They have to code their time, their expenses to different funds, accounts, and projects. Is very detailed. We provide them over a year and a half of data, of historical data so that they're doing things based on what they see the work going to be and what they've historically done versus just a status quo. I got $100 this year, I want $105 next year. It's not that way. It's about what you really can do, what the work is. Next one, Chris. Oh, I'm sorry, Steve. On page 4, we have guiding principles. Every year I go through, before we start the budget, I list guiding principles and our goals and objectives based on what I see the board's direction and to complete the mission of the district. We focus on, here are the things, the priorities. They're not necessarily listed in perfect priority order, but they're listed, so the managers have to look at that and consider those things and say, what I'm requesting as far as funding and the work my staff is going to do, is it toward the mission of the district or is it just something I want to do? And it has to be focused on these missions, the principles or goals and objectives, or it doesn't go in. So
Jim, you can sit down here if you want.
Yeah, sit in front of me so I can. So again, we're looking at maintaining status quo operations, the minimum dollars needed. We've eliminated things that we don't need to do anymore, but we're very careful. We don't want to defer any necessary maintenance, let things fall apart so that the future generation has to pay for it. That's not what we're about. We've tried to do any preemptive action. For example, we're looking at the brackish water project and some other projects to try to enhance our groundwater mission. Obviously, one of the most important things we do is when we're doing our stuff is to make sure our employees are safe and to protect our assets. We don't want people getting hurt because that costs money and lives and morale. And we protect our assets so we don't have to keep replacing things unnecessarily. That is a huge item because I've sent you notes before. Our experience mod under our workers' compensation is well below 60%, which is almost unheard of in this kind of an industry. And it's because we take safety very serious here. And of course, we address all the mandated legal requirements we have to do. And of course, and then rehab and replacement of infrastructure as it goes along. The key thing, and I've said this to you for 18 years, I tell the managers, it's like a smorgasbord. Go to it, tell me what you need, but if you tell me you need it and I give it to you, you better need it, you better eat it. Don't throw it away. So next. There are some what we call non-departmental things that are not directly related to each of the operating departments, our debt service, depreciation, the GMA charges, all those kind of things that sort of are the bookkeeping kind of things. Those are prepared by the finance division and put in. The revenue projections, again, are prepared by the finance, separate from the departments putting in their budget. I've been in places before where the people putting in the expenses are also the ones estimating the revenue. Well, guess what? The revenue always seems to match what they want the expense to be. And so we keep them separate so that there's no influence. The finance does it based on what the historical look is and what they're projecting, and it has nothing to do with what's being asked for. It's a good way to basically keep a check and balance out there. We have tons of history on groundwater extractions for the different zones, by ag and M&I. We have it broken down by the 2 periods, the biannual periods that the reporting occurs. Property tax, we have ungodly amounts of information on that. And there are 2 different types of property tax we'll talk about. One, it's our general water conservation recreation activities property tax. It's the one that goes into the general water conservation fund. Then there is a special assessment property tax that is a voter-approved tax that we do separately to pay for our state water allocation and the contract requirements of the state water. The 2 never mingle. Let me just say that, and we'll say it again. Those 2 are kept separate. The General Water Conservation Fund never pays for the state water project, and vice versa. Okay? Next. We'll talk about the Oxnard-Hueneme pipeline. We have a water delivery agreement. We go through our projections with each of the contractors on the agreement. This is an M&I pipeline. We met with the OH users as we're required to do when we put out the budget in late April. We went through our projections with them. They concurred with the numbers. We talked about the issues that we put in the budget, and we believe the budget represents what they have said that's acceptable to us. Now, there is one project we'll talk to you about later, the iron manganese treatment facility that got a lot of support and now might be waffling a little bit. Mike can probably talk about that later, but we have it in the budget because at the time we did the budget, it seemed there was support for it, but we'll talk about that more. And obviously, in our projections, we dealt with the emergency ordinance of the Fox Canyon compliance, the reduction of pumping. Next. Pleasant Valley Pipeline, again, we have 15 years of monthly trend data. We look at weather patterns, whether we think El Nino or La Nina is coming, determine whether surface water delivery is available. Are we going to have a fall release? Obviously, we're not going to have a fall release this year. There's no expectation of much surface water delivery to anybody, but for PV has asked us not, even if it rained like hell tomorrow, they don't want that water delivered to us, but to them, until we can figure out how to separate the quagga mussel, the potential quagga mussels going down the surface water to them. So you'll see in the PV pipeline, there's no delivery plan because all we deliver to them can deliver is surface water or water pumped from the Satakoy well field, which is the wells are well above the groundwater level, so we're not going to be able to pump them, or deep water from the OH system. And we have enough problem with the OH system and nitrates that we're not going to deliver any water out to PV on that. We do have a contractual requirement, but it's to deliver 12.22 of diverted surface water. We're not required to give them 12.22 of their needed water, but only if we're diverted water. And finally, the quagga mussel infestation I just talked about. At this point, we are in negotiations and working with Pleasant Valley, Craig, and others. We've given them a protocol of how we will operate the system until we can resolve the quagga mussel infestation. We're not going to be able to get rid of the quagga mussels. We have to control to try to keep them out of the pipeline. What we did last year, and we're going to continue again this year because we're no deliveries, is a fixed monthly charge because there are fixed costs that the district must endure to maintain that system. Next. Pumping trough pipeline, very much the same thing. It's a conjunctive use. Surface water deliveries and the 5 deep wells, plus we can give from Satakoy wells. Again, we're not expecting any surface water deliveries because we don't want to put any water in the pipeline until we figure out the quagga mussel separation process or elimination. But at this point, we're still able to pump the 5 deep wells. Now, and I know that's been an issue for a lot of people on the Oxnard Plain last year. People thought we were crying wolf because the We said the deep wells were going to, the water levels would drop below the bowls, would have to turn off. Well, once the GMA authorized wells to be drilled to replace to make sure people could use water, people went on their wells, and so we didn't run below the bowls as fast as we thought. But we're heading in that direction. It's just a matter of time, but it depends on how much people use the system versus pump their own wells down. Again, there's no fall release. We got to deal with quagga mussel. The one thing that Tina will discuss later is on the PTP, we are changing how we want to do the rate structure. We believe, similar to what we've done with PV, we have to have a fixed charge component and then a delivery component, because whether we deliver water or not, there's cost to that pipeline, fixed costs that we have to maintain, and we'll go into that, and we're asking you for your approval. We're going to talk about 3 different methods, that 2 that we considered and a third that has been asked why we didn't consider it, and I'll talk about that at that time. Next. Revenue projections, again, we look at the historical projection of extractions, we look at the weather patterns and things. We have an algebraic formula we do to comply with the water code and the 3-to-1 ratio. That's not for every dollar for ag. City pays 3 times more. It's an algebraic formula that smooths the total cost out by algebraically allocating it on a 3-to-1 ratio. And we'll talk about that later. Those charges are applied to all the when we do deliver water, there is a O&M delivery charge that will drop that down. We've also dealt with the fact that the GMA emergency ordinance says we can pump less out there also. Next. This is just a simple concept of what that algebraic formula, we look at the ag pumping times the rate, not the rates that we're proposing in the current budget. When we first start, we look at what's the rate the board's already approved, the current year rate. We take that times our ag extraction projection and our M&I projection, say what's the total revenue at the current rate. Then we look at our budget, the items that I'm going to recommend after talking to the department heads. What's the total cost? We take that revenue number minus the cost, and then less any miscellaneous revenues like property tax, investment or anything. And then the bottom line, when that's all done, we say, do we need a rate increase, or did the current rate and the miscellaneous revenues cover that? In this case, we think we can cover it on Zone A, we can cover the cost. Zone B, we need a rate increase. Next. This is an example. Again, this is the budget, not as it was submitted to you May 1st, but the budget that we are talking about now, where the revisions with that Zone A rate increase out. Just bottom line, ag's going to pay 5.64 million of the total 10 million that we're going to get from groundwater extraction charge. M&I will pay 4.36 million. So ag is going to pay 56% of the revenue, M&I 44%. Now, when you look at it on the next one, it'll show, go to the next one, please. Oh, sorry, go back. Then I thought I had another slide there. Anyway, while ag is paying 56, M&I is paying 44. When you look at the production that from ag is obviously going to be higher, around 80% of the groundwater extractions. The one thing I want to make sure certain people are aware, this includes groundwater extractions directly reported to us by well operators and the Zone A charge that is charged to anybody that receives water on the pipelines, because that's an in lieu charge, and that is paid to by the user, and then we put it in Zone A to cover it. So it is an in lieu groundwater extraction charge. That's what that is over there. You have to combine the two together. Next. This is Zone B, same thing, 3.515 million from the groundwater extractions charged to people in Zone B. Ag is going to pay 46%, M&I 54%. Big reason for that is no deliveries to PV, very few little delivery to PTP because of the lack of surface water and the quagga mussel issue. And on the M&I side, we deliver to the biggest city in the county, city of Oxnard. Next. So for Zone A, here's the one, I did it, but I didn't have it in the right order. So as I said, Ag is on Zone A is going to pay 56% of the pump charge, while they'll be extracting 80% of the projected pumping. M&I will be pumping 20% of the total 178,400 in pumping we project district-wide, paying about 44% of the cost. And that's due to the algebraic formula versus an 80 to 20 charge. Next. Same thing for Zone B. Ag will be pumping 72%, M&I 28%, and Ag will be paying 46%, and M&I 54% because of the algebraic formula and the requirement of the water code that clearly states the district cannot charge less than a 3-to-1 ratio. It's not a choice you have, it's a legal requirement that the legislators have set for us. Next, please. Water code, I'm not going to go through this history. I did it last year. I just want to put it on the record that there is a water code, and the district is clearly laid out in certain sections of the water code, what we can, can't do, why we're doing what we do, etc. Next. There's a history behind the water code. You have it, you can look at it. Where we got to today is charging 3-to-1. That started, the legislation was changed in the 60s, and we began doing the 3-to-1, 5-to-1 ratio as required at that time in 1978. Next. That was after Prop 13, when our property taxes went down and we could no longer fund water conservation efforts with just property tax. Next. And after Prop 13, there was a confusion on the legislative side on the water code, so they repealed a couple of sections that allowed us to collect enough in pump charges to offset our costs, as long as the costs were reasonable and didn't exceed our requirements for water conservation efforts. Next. Again, it continues. The key thing is the legislators repealed the groundwater equalization charge and property tax to the fact that they can't exceed. Let me back up, sorry. What the law said was you cannot take in more pump charge and property tax, either or both, than you could have gotten in the property tax, but because the property tax had been dropped because of Prop 13, they repealed that and said, forget that. You get your property tax plus charge whatever you need on the pump charge to pay for the costs you need to meet your regulatory requirements for groundwater protection. Next. Sorry, it gets confusing. Again, the water code goes on. I wanted you to be clear, the water code, our water code issues were not changed by anything in the Prop 218 Omnibus implementation bill. They did not go in and repeal or change anything on the 3-to-1, 5-to-1. And again, as we've said before, we don't believe Proposition 218 applies, but we're going to follow those requirements until we work our way through the courts. Next. Establishment of zones, that's a key part. Basically, the water code says it's your decision. It doesn't say how you have to do the zones. It doesn't say what criteria. It's your decision. If you want to have 30 zones, 10 zones, whatever, you want to have criteria, but it's your decision, and those decisions that you make on zones are conclusive and binding on everybody. It's not a legal discussion, it is your decision. And right now, again, we're only recommending Zone A and Zone B. Zone C was eliminated a long time ago. And so next, miscellaneous revenues. We have a lot of miscellaneous revenues that we get in, and the supplemental water program is discontinued now. But any revenues we get in, we try to use those to offset any pump charge increase we have, so that the pump charge isn't paying 100% of all the costs. There are other things offsetting those costs. Next. On the expenditure side, as you're going to see, and you've seen, we allocate them reasonably and proportionally to funds, accounts, and projects. And our chart of accounts is quite long and very detailed, and managers are encouraged to add more projects and accounts so that they can detail, even to the point of saying, hey, I want to look at grants, but it's going to take me some time. So we'll set up a project, so they're coding their time to the work on the grant, so we know what that cost was for us to put together the grant, and it's not being charged to something else, and we can track that stuff. We consider factors like the direct benefit for mission purposes by the zones. We look at the indirect cost, and we have, as I told you last year and every year, Exhibit 417 in the exhibits that Tony will talk about later is that black binder that I call it, but it's the summary of the budget detail. It's all the detail that I've talked to you about up to now. It's all the history of the rate, the revenues, the pumping, the expenditures. It's everything that we have, the detail of this budget. If we put it, we give you this, but the document's this, that it takes to get to this, and a lot of computer data file to do it. But a budget document is not supposed to be a computer dump. It's a document for you to make decisions on. And as we've showed every year, the environmental cost allocation policy is a real good example of the kind of thinking we go through when we're trying to determine where to charge costs to. That is consistent with governmental accounting, GASB, and generally accepted accounting principles. Next. District staffing is, we talked about earlier, we have a small staff. Some people might say, no, but you got to sit in our shoes when the work's coming. The allocation of time is spread out over funds and Zone A, Zone B, the pipelines, everything. So one person, Mike Ellis is an example, I'll show his later. Mike in one day may charge 8 hours of time over 5, 6 different funds, 20 different accounts, and 10 different projects. But he accounts for his time almost, not as anal as an attorney, but pretty close. Because we got to get work done. We don't have time to sit there with a timer.
It's amazing how everybody understood that.
I figured that would help people. and to even, so we spread those out, and when they charge time, even 15 minutes to a different project account, that's where the benefits are charged to too. So we can always tell what these different projects are costing us. We do have an external independent auditor, as you're well aware, that comes in every year, audits it, and I can tell you one of the main things, first thing they ask for is the information of how people are allocating their time and why they're doing it and why those costs are set up that way. So this is looked at not by us, just by us, but the auditors. Next. This is Mike Ellis's, when we input the budget, this is a budget input screen. The next, go through these. Next one. Next one. That's how much time, if you look over on the left-hand side, you have a fund number, and I'm not going to get into what the fund is.
Can you see that up there, right?
You have copies of it. The account number and project number. Mike looks at his work plan for the next year. He allocates his time to any project that we have or a new project, and we spread out his time and his benefits in that kind of detail. And I was going to use Tony Emmert's, but his is worse. Tony's timesheet, and he's the deputy general manager, his timesheet is this long every month. It's amazing. Next. And that's what our timesheet, Mike Ellis again is the operations manager. That's what one payroll period, a 2-week period, how he allocates his time to the different projects. So for somebody to imply that we don't follow governmental accounting procedures or GAAP is erroneous. We are very detailed in how we do things around here. Next. Again, you can't see it, you have a copy of this. Is what we call our overhead allocation sleep. There's certain vehicles and equipment like a weed sprayer. A weed sprayer may be located out at El Rio, but taken up at Saticoy to spray or to Santa Felicia Dam or something. Because of that, we allocate the cost of a spray or anything to the different funds based on their historical use in the different areas. So one fund, like the OH pipeline, isn't paying for everything, or Zone A. It's spread out based on where we're using equipment. And for a person to sit there and try to record time for maintenance and stuff, for a weed sprayer, for example, what fund where they use that wouldn't be logical. So what we do is every year we update this on a historical basis where things were being used, and when they put in costs, we allocate the cost of those different equipment, people, et cetera, based on this formula. So it's a very detailed allocation system. Next. We're going to talk about capital improvements again. We allocate those proportionally to funds, as we mentioned before. Go to the next one, please. An example this year, I'll give you, last year we used the Santa shop, the Lower River Invasive Species Control Project. That's where we're looking. Jim Grisham is working on a project to try to figure out chlorination, other things in different areas to protect the Freeman diversion, the PTP, the PV pipelines from quagga mussels in case they came down. If you look in the top right-hand corner, it shows the funding sources. It's broken down by 20% is going to be charged to the Water Conservation Fund because the spreading concerns, and then 40% to the PTP and 40% to the PV fund, because those are the two funds that are most concerned, the people receiving the water, most concerned about quagga mussels staying out. The other stuff, quagga mussels are more of an operational nightmare where they clog up pipes and mess up equipment. That, based on our best judgment, is the best allocation of these costs. The board, as you go through the CIP, can look at how we allocate costs and say, I don't like that. I want 30, 30, 30, 30, whatever you want. We'll change it. But we're telling you, based on our best judgment as professionals, that's the best allocation based on who is going to benefit from those costs. Next. Use of funds. Again, we use all those funds to allocate costs, and we do it based on our judgment of where costs are achieving our mission and where they should be charged to. Next. The overhead fund, that's this office, your time, the videoing we're doing, the attorney's time when it's not on a specific lawsuit or project, just general counsel, my time, etc. And accounting that gets spread to everybody is done based on an agreed upon methodology for accounting, for allocating the cost. It's reasonable, it's proportional, and it's required, and it is included even in the water delivery agreement of the Oxnard users. An independent auditor looks at this each year to make sure that we are complying with it and applying those overhead costs correctly. The way it works is this. Let's just say I have 8 hours on my timesheet is charged out. Once that's charged, I charge my time to the overhead fund. Then the allocation takes that and charges it to the operating funds based on the percentages that we come up under this methodology. And that money is then used to pay for my time out of each of those funds based on that methodology. So the OH, PTP, PV, Zone B, Zone A get the benefit of my work for that day, not just one fund. If I work on one specific project, say I spend the whole day at an OH users meeting, I charge 8 hours to the OH pipeline directly. But when it's just general management of the district overhead fund, it is an agreed upon methodology. It's a sound used by all governmental agencies. Now, governmental agencies will use different items like number of copies made or something. We have a specific methodology we've used. You've approved it, and our auditors believe it is a sound process. Next. So what now? What happens when when the budget's all done, the managers, they're like little kids. I send them out and say, go do your budget and come back. Sorry, guys. And then they come back, and I sit down with all of them first and say, go through your budget. Everybody has to go through each line item that they input in their budget. We all talk about it as a management group to say, well, I've already taken care of that, so you don't need to budget for it, things like that. So we may try to make sure there's no duplication. Then I sit down with each manager and I talk to them and say, can you get this done? What do you expect to do, your workload, et cetera. And then we take those, once we've pared it down and said, okay, this is a good cost projection for the next year. Then we look at the revenue projections, compare the two and say, do they balance? If they don't balance the revenue needs, that's when we look at rate increases or other ways using reserves, et cetera. When that's all done, that's when I turn it over to the finance staff and say, put together the budget, and that takes care of providing you a balanced budget. This document and the stuff the revisions we've made, what we've shown you is for everything we're asking for to spend an appropriation for next year, we have revenue sources, whether it's reserves, investment earnings, charges, whatever, that we can cover those costs and still maintain the reserve level that you require under your policy. That's what a balanced budget is. And then, again, I'll point out to you, Exhibit 417 has all the detail of each line item that makes up this budget. So if you're interested, you can go through it in detail. Next. The proposal, the budget is to deal with not what we as staff want to do, but what's the mission of the district and what does the board want us to accomplish that mission. We believe we've done that, and we've covered everything we believe that is important to you to keep doing the regulatory requirements of protecting these aquifers, the 7 interconnected aquifers of this district. Next. So today, the first question is, as you go through this, do you agree with the process we used? Do you think we were detailed enough? Do you think we allocated things correctly? Do you think our rates are reasonable, except what we're proposing? And then in June, if it is, we'll ask you to approve the budget. If you believe that our process has errors in it, are flawed, it's not reasonable, you tell us. Go back, and before we come back to you and we bring you back the budget in June, tell us what changes you want us to make so that it does meet your requirements. We'll go back, we'll fix it, and bring it back to you in June and ask you for approval. We've made revisions to the budget. At the end of this meeting today, or anytime during this meeting, you can direct us to make further changes to the budget before we bring it back to you in June. We just ask you to make it clear what you want, and I'll recount everything at the end to make sure we cover everything, so that because we only have about 12 days till the board meeting to get those changes done. Next. We do have some unique circumstances. We're not a utility or water purveyor. Our mission and purpose is clearly, and authority is clearly established in the Water Code and state constitution. We are subject to a governmental accounting and financial reporting. We comply with that thoroughly. As we mentioned last month, we got for the 12th straight year, Christine, the GFOA Financial Reporting Award. You don't get that award unless you are complying with GAAP and Governmental Accounting Standard Board requirements. We are a small district, so as I said, staff works across a lot of activities. One day we may work on 5 different operations, one person. The groundwater basins are hydrologically connected. They do impact each other in one way or another. And so, but it's impossible for us to account for every water molecule where it's moving from one basin to the next. And then finally, everything we do is about the long-term benefits. We're not necessarily worried about today, but what we do today, how it protects the future. Will the basins be usable 10 years from now, 15 years from now, or are we depleting them and hurting them so bad? Our job is to protect it so that it doesn't get damaged so that it can't be used. Next. And that's what that first statement says. Ours are more long-term benefits. That's why it's a regulatory issue. We're trying to protect it for our children and our grandchildren and not let it get abused by the current. A utility and a water purveyor is more of a day-to-day thing. A utility can just turn the water off today, or turn it on tomorrow. That's not how we operate. Ours is long-term. And we believe that the Court of Appeals has said that our fees don't exceed the district's reasonable groundwater management cost. The district allocates these costs in a fair and reasonable relationship to the burdens on the resources. That's a direct quote from the recent appeal court decision, and we certainly have known that all along. Next. So Later on in this meeting, first Tina's going to take you through, and I'll help work with her on the budget that we're proposing, go through some of the details, answer questions, and then Tony Morgan's going to get up and talk about some technical supporting data, and then John Farkoff from HF&H and Rick Simonson is here also to support, and Rod Smith from Straticon are here to talk about our quantitative analysis, the justification that supports the 3-to-1 ratio so that we can harmonize the water code in the state constitution water code and water code section 75594. So with that, do you have any questions about the process, what we do, et cetera, before we move on to Tina and get into the real budget discussion? Bruce, okay.
Mike, is there any carryover of encumbered funds from the prior year budget?
Yes.
And so that supplements these numbers, or is that included in these numbers?
No, what happens, when you look at the funds, the fund pages in the budget, if you look, on the left side is that budget brief where it shows the line item budget. On the right side, it shows the cash flow. That will show what we expect to, we're showing a projection through the end of what we're going to spend. And then on this side, we show the cash beginning balance, what we think we're going to have to carry over to cover against that, and then any other uses of those reserves to get to a final cash balance at the end of the year. What happens at the end of June, we look at any open POs we have or anything where we've signed an agreement, we've committed to money, to spend money, but the work's not done yet. We encumber that, and that goes on the books to show, hey, you can't spend that money because we've already accounted for it. So we do track that, and we provide that to you, the Finance Committee, every month, that information in detail, what encumbrances we carry over and what the status of those
That's
are.
cash flow versus budget, so that's why I'm asking the
That's
question.
correct. Because encumbrances aren't a budget item anymore. They're now an encumbrance of the reserve of the cash.
Okay.
Okay?
Any other questions? Any questions in the audience?
That's it? Oh, I'm sorry. Tony just reminded me. He's next before Tina. Sorry, Tina. Tony has his part now.
Members of the board, I just want to make 3 brief observations. Number 1, of course, this is a budget workshop, so this is your opportunity, as Mike indicated, to discuss the budget and its components.
Turn the lights back on.
There we go. Maybe it's better that I be seen in the light and not in the dark, but some would dispute that. But I'm Tony Tremblay, the district's counsel. Anyway, this is your opportunity to discuss the budget and its components and to review information and evidence in support of the district's groundwater charges. Number 2, all the directors, all of you have been given flash drives with all of the exhibits in the administrative record through May 28, 2015. Most of these exhibits, they go from number 1 to number 423. Most of them you're very familiar with. And they are posted on the district's website today. Exhibits 1 through 370, approximately 370 were from last year's administrative record. We have updated a few of them, just a very few of those. You've already seen those. The balance are new this year, and today we're going to be going through some of the significant exhibits and the significant information, for example, from Straticon and from HF&H. I want the record to reflect, I don't see Ms. Epstein, who's with the City of Ventura here today, but I know there are several city representatives, including Susan Rundgren, so I'm going to have the record reflect that I'm handing Susan Rundgren a copy, a flash drive containing exhibits 1 through 423 to today. Those same exhibits, as I said, are posted on the district's website. Finally, and thirdly, and then I'll be done, in an abundance of caution, to reiterate what Mike said, the district is utilizing a Proposition 218 majority protest process for potential increases to its groundwater extraction charges, and we are providing evidence in support of the compliance of the proposed groundwater charges with the substantive requirements of Proposition 218. However, that said, the district continues to assert that groundwater charges are not property-related fees, are not subject to Proposition 218, and the district continues to reserve all rights to argue the non-applicability of Proposition 218 to these groundwater extraction charges. And that concludes my comments for this morning.
Questions for Tony?
Any questions for Tony?
Okay, Tina. With that, now we're going to get into the actual budget discussion.
Okay, the real fun stuff begins now.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, I'd like to reiterate that the presentation today is based off the revised budget. You have all been delivered 50 replacement pages. Those are the pages of the proposed budget that was handed out on May 1st that actually had some modifications as a result of the changes that we're going to discuss here.
And those are
They
made
are-
available to the public if you want. They're the ones that have the organization starting and then the replacement pages.
And copies of that are also posted on the district's website. So with that, turned off. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and recap a few of the changes that were made. The first one already mentioned, the rate increase for Zone A was eliminated out of the revenue projections. There was some reductions to the capital improvement project to be more in line with what staff believes can actually be achieved. And we will discuss that in a little more detail as we get to the CIP section of this presentation. We've also updated the retirement costs because earlier this month, the board authorized the payoff of the per side fund, which, as articulated during that meeting, would have a positive impact on the district's future rates and costs for retirement. And that impacted all the funds, in essence. And that's why you are receiving 50 pages of revisions, okay? There was also a vehicle that is being replaced in the current year. We didn't think we were going to get to making that purchase in the current year, and it was budgeted in the current year, so we've eliminated that. There's also a very minor revision to a position that was vacated and filled at a different level. And there was, again, as discussed earlier this month, there was additional allocations for the Santa Felicia Dam passage assessment. So with that, I'm going to cover the budget in sections. Something that impacts every fund is basically personnel, what your team looks like. As you can see, in fiscal year 15-16, there are 3 additional positions being requested. 2 of them are within the administration division. Specifically, we're adding an IT support staff and also a park services officer. These positions are being recommended not only to cover existing workload, but also to meet the new demands of the organization. Within groundwater, we're adding a staff hydrogeologist. Again, the GSA has brought on additional work for the district, and we believe that all of these positions are necessary in order to serve our constituents the way that they deserve. There's, within the personnel costs, there's also the 2.5% COLA per the MOU, and as previously mentioned, there is a senior accounting technician position that is being elevated to an accountant 1. Now we're going to begin with a breakdown of the various funds. As I'm going through it, I know there's a lot of figures, so I'm going to try to simplify all of these figures. They should match with what you see within the revised 50 pages of budget material. But as I go through it, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask at this point. We're going to begin with the General Water Conservation Fund. As you can see here, the groundwater extraction fees represent about 77% of the revenue generated for this fund. Now, I'm going to get into the next slide just briefly to articulate the fact that we're talking about the General Water Conservation Fund. However, that fund is actually made up of 3 sub-funds. They are the water conservation activities, recreation activities, and the general operating activities. Those 3 combined are actually the numbers that I'm going to be covering. There is also a breakout of these separate sub-funds, which we'll cover briefly.
We have that breakdown by line item, again, in Exhibit 417, the detail, but what you have in the budget is the total combined page. The reason it's combined is all 3 of those sub-funds are the responsibility of the water conservation efforts. Recreation is a requirement of our FERC license. Our FERC license is a requirement of having Santa Felicia Dam. Santa Felicia Dam is the responsibility of the groundwater conservation efforts, the Zone A charges. So that is why they're combined together. They're all the responsibilities of our Zone A water conservation responsibilities.
Thank you. So with that, again, extraction charges, almost 80% of revenues generated for this fund. Property taxes, another 17%, and then other miscellaneous revenues make up about 6% of that. Within on the expenditure side, as you can see, about 30% is personnel. Then when we get into operating costs, there's about 21%. That 21% represents about $2.7 million. What's interesting about this figure here is that of that $2.7 million, about 50% of that is for contractual services. For contractual services, within the budget, page number 16 actually lists out every contractual service line item. But I'll simplify that for you. There are essentially 3 areas of contractual services for the Water Conservation Fund. So that $1.4 million really falls into 3 categories. They're regulatory compliance matters, which the district is obligated to fund, and there's legal expenses, which of course, with all of the various legal issues and challenges, the district must protect its interests, and so and the third item is the quagga mussel issue that the district is addressing in terms of trying to manage at this point. So that's now the other, as you can see, we're overhead will that's about 14%. We'll cover that when we get to the overhead fund to give you a little bit more of a breakdown on that. The next item is debt service, which is again not discretionary at this point because it is based on obligations that the district has already incurred in the past. Then we have some minor items, at least in terms of percentages there, such as capital outlay. That is at 5%. I did want to discuss that just briefly because On page number 15 of your budget, there is also, like in contractual services, there is a breakdown of all of the capital outlay line items that make up this 5%. This 5% represents almost close to, I think, $600,000 for the Water Conservation Fund. I believe for the entire district, it's about $900,000. While it's only 5%, I want to highlight some of the items out here within this capital outlay. 200,000 of that is for new docks out at Lake Piru, and I believe that those are the visitor docks, correct? Not
boarding floats that people launch their boats from.
okay. Thank you. And we just replaced some, but they were not the visitors. You want to?
Yeah, we previously replaced the marina docks that we use to park our rental fleet, and when people rent, they slip from us. These are the actual single dock boarding floats that people, when they back their boat down the boat ramp, tie off to, move their vehicle, and then launch and going to and from the boat ramp. And they're 30 plus years old. They were put in the early 80s.
Okay. There's also another $110,000 to replace the district's financial system, which at this point is in need of replacement. This $110,000 is not funded 100% from the General Water Conservation Fund. It is proportionately allocated amongst the various funds that are being served by the district's financial system currently. And there's also $138,000 for a tractor loader for the Santa Felicia Dam and Lake Piru area. And there is also $90,000 for a fish trap in relationship to the HCP?
No, this is for the license for monitoring our water releases. Was actually in our budget this year, and FERC still hasn't approved that plan, but in anticipation that they're going to improve the plan at some point, this is to start the design and manufacturing of it. It would probably not be deployed this next fiscal year, but we would start to design it.
Okay. And so that covers what I wanted to detail in regards to capital outlay. The other large item there has to do with the transfers out to the capital improvement projects. That's 13%. There is on page 49 a detailed list of those projects. I just wanted to highlight that within the General Water Conservation Fund, the significant projects are the Brackish Water Project, the Santa Felicia Dam, various projects, and also the Park Ranger facility.
Yeah, and with that, a couple of comments. Number one, while we're recommending the elimination, not doing the Zone A rate increase, and I took out some corresponding cost out of 3 CIP projects, you'll notice that what we left in there was enough money to keep the projects going. There are things that have to get done, but it's the money we know, the stuff we can get to, we didn't eliminate all the money. We left enough to keep the projects moving forward.
Okay. Now with that, you'll actually see a working capital or fund balance, as we accountants like to term it. We started off with a beginning balance of a little bit under $12 million. The activity for fiscal year 15-16 adds another $234,000 reserved for already for existing projects is about $7 million, leaving an ending fund balance of about $5 million within the board's reserve goal. As previously mentioned, there is a handout that you have with 5 years worth of And it's on a legal,
Size document.
yes, legal size document that outlines the breakdown between the different activities that make up the Water Conservation Fund. I have put on the screen the fiscal year 15-16 figures so that I can walk you through that and explain how the district funding works. As you can see here, there are total revenues of nearly $13 million being projected for this upcoming year. Of that, $2.2 million relates to property tax. You also have about $12.7 million in total expenditures. Now, the reason I covered property tax and not any of the other revenue sources was because property tax in the district is first and foremost used to cover whatever is needed in recreation. So for example, recreation has some minimal funding projections in other categories. There's about $16,000 being projected of revenue in recreations for this upcoming year. That, with expenditures of $1.1 million, that means that we need a little over $1 million in property taxes to cover operating costs for the year for recreation activities.
Pump charges do not pay for recreation.
Yes. So
They could.
They could.
Because recreation is the responsibility of the Water Conservation Fund because of the FERC license, but we use the property tax first. So we want to make sure everybody is aware none of your pump charges are being used to pay for the recreation, although we could.
Yes. After the recreation fund, then we look at the general operating fund. As you can see, the general operating fund has about $44,000 of miscellaneous revenue sources, most of which is interest earnings. We've got about $425,000 worth of expenses, which means that we need about $381,000, again, to meet the operational needs of this sub-fund. We again turn to property tax as our revenue source, okay? Now, what's remaining out of the $2.2 million in property taxes is then used to offset the extraction charges of the Zone A water conservation activities, along with all of the other revenues there.
So
Okay.
this long legal page you got is for the last 5 years. And we did that primarily because that's 2011-12 was the first year of the Ventura lawsuit. This clearly shows that at no time has all 5 years in the history of the district has the pump charge paid for recreation or general operating costs. It's always been the property tax. The balance of the property tax, which is general revenue for you to, with your discretion, is then used to offset the pump charge. So by conclusion, it is impossible to say that the rates and the pump charges pay more than 100% of the cost, because in this case, almost $750,000 of property tax are covering the cost of water conservation efforts to balance out the budget. The pump charges aren't paying 100% of the cost. So again, the detail of that first column is the page you see on page 20 in the budget document. It's the detail, the total page in more detail. Those other funds are detailed in Exhibit 417 of the exhibits, the detail pages, but we wanted to show you because the question always comes up about the property tax or that the pump charge is paying for other things or beyond water conservation efforts. Hopefully this shows you, for the last 5 years in particular, we can go back further if you want, But these 5 years that have been in question, at no time has pump charge paid for those other things. Clear? Okay.
In terms of additional information, wanted to share with you in regards to the General Water Conservation Fund. The first bullet point there represents direct extractions. We anticipate those extractions to be about 6% less than the current year, to coming down to about 163,000 acre feet. The groundwater extraction charge in lieu, or the groundwater in lieu extraction charge from deliveries, as you can see, we're looking at a slight decrease projection in the OH. Again, we're eliminating any projections for water deliveries via the Pleasant Valley Pipeline, and we're pretty much equal to current year projections on the PTP. I know it says 1.3%, but that's in essence almost at existing current levels. As was covered before, total water activity is 80% for ag use, 20% for M&I. This last bullet point, what I was trying to convey with it is that, well, Zone A is district-wide. So every parcel within zone, every parcel within the district is within Zone A. However, if we were to take just the pumping activity that takes place in Zone B, and that would be 50%. That means that the other half of the pumping that takes place happens outside of Zone B, which means Zone A exclusively. Okay, so you've got half of the pumping activity taking place out of Zone A and out of Zone B. Okay?
But remember, Zone B people, 50% of the pump, they do pay the Zone A charge, and they pay the Zone B charge. They pay both. What Tina's saying is roughly half of the pumping's happening in Zone B, the other half the rest of the district.
Mm-hmm.
But Zone B people pay both because they are in Zone A.
Correct.
Tina?
Yes.
The 163,000, is that district-wide? Is that Zone A pumping?
That is correct.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
District.
And then Tina, on your property tax projection, is that something we got from the county, I assume?
No.
No?
No, we do the projection based on a historical use in our projection. We're pretty close. We're usually within about 150 to 100,000 on our projections. We've got it down pretty cold now. It obviously depends on if assessed valuations go up, house sales, everything, but we're pretty close on that one.
Now, the only thing we've seen some deviation on within property taxes occurs now with the dissolution of the redevelopment agencies, because now as the obligations of the redevelopment agencies are starting to diminish, there is some excess or some additional remaining funds, which means that our property tax portion may be increasing to a certain extent. But again, that's hard to tell because there were various redevelopment agencies within the county, of which each had their own obligations that expire at different points in time. But we do expect...
We may or may not get a portion of some of those redevelopments.
Yes, at a certain point in time, when all of those obligations have expired, we will get a better picture of what our future is going to look like. Additionally, just wanted to point out there are some designations for capital improvement projects within the Water Conservation Fund, specifically for the Santa Felicia Dam projects. As you know, we've got various projects, including the outlet works. We've got the fish passage, and also the spillway. There's, this year, we've also designated, versus putting within the budget, a higher legal appropriation or cost, or yes, a higher legal appropriation, because of the various legal matters. We are asking to put aside $275,000 in or not, well, we are putting it aside, but it is within the reserve balance. We are reserving, designating $275,000 for legal issues that may arise. And then we also are required to keep about $880,000 for the COP reserve. Additionally, within this budget, we have also included payment for the district's other pension obligations. Their post-employment obligations. And that again is based off of an actuarial report that provides some guidance in terms of what's necessary to not only pay our unfunded liability in this area, but also the current year activity. And once again, just want to reiterate that this revised budget does not include a proposed rate increase for Zone A. If there are no questions on the Water Conservation Fund, let's go on to the State Water Fund. Again, this is a special revenue fund. Revenues, as you can see, are very minimal this year. The reason is, if you look at the beginning balance there, we've got a beginning balance of a little over $2 million anticipated. We have expenses for the year anticipated at just under $1 million. 87% of that relates to costs for the state water import. So, in essence, our contract with the state to acquire the water, which at this point is they're expecting a release of 20%. That leaves us an ending fund balance of a little over $1 million. The district's reserve goal is set at $1 million, and therefore, that is the reason we are, in essence, keeping the assessment request to a minimum of about $100,000 in revenues.
The reason we do that, just so you know, is if you take an assessment off the tax roll, you got to then vote it on. But if you keep it on, you can just keep it going. And obviously, it's a voter approved. You don't want to mess around with it. So that, and again, I want to point out, and Tina's going to show it, that beginning balance, that reserve, did not come from the general operating funds, water conservation funds, property tax. That's all been built up from the special assessment tax separately.
So in that, I mentioned that there's a 20% allocation for 2015. Again, 100% property tax assessment. I don't think we need to reiterate those points again. But the final point there, neither the City of Ventura nor the City of Oxnard residents pay anything for this particular fund.
Because they have their own allocations with the state water fund, although the City of Ventura brings in nothing. But I will also point out that the water we bring in on the state water fund is used for groundwater recharge purposes into the forebay, which Ventura and Oxnard residents do benefit from.
that brings us to the Freeman Fund. One of the first things you'll notice here is that there is quite a difference between the revenues generated and the expenditures generated or expected for this fiscal year. And so just want to briefly address that. Again, we're going back to what our beginning balance for the year is projected to be. We're expected to be at a little bit over $2 million. This activity here, the revenues being outspent by expenditures, close to $950,000, is still leaves us a sufficient ending fund balance to meet the district's reserve goal. Okay? Now, with that, let's talk about the numbers. As you can see, almost 100% of the revenues is generated by groundwater activity, which is your extraction fees. On the expenditure side, you've got the largest portion, almost 50%, is in transfers to cover the capital improvement projects. That's about $2 million, or actually over $2 million. Of that $2 million, $1.8 million is for the Freeman Diversion Rehab Project. So that, in essence, is one project that makes up that amount. And again, that is a regulatory compliance matter, which the district has little to no discretion on at this point. The other item I wanted to cover here is the 23% for operating costs. That 23% represents about $964,000, so almost $1 million. Of that $1 million, 76% of that cost can be broken down into three categories. One is contractual services. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's really $730,000 of that, which is 76% of that almost $1 million, is in one category, and that is contractual services. And those contractual services, which again are on page 27 of your budget, are predominantly related to the Habitat Conservation Plan. Okay, so while those numbers seem at first glance pretty high, just kind of want to reiterate that the district has little discretion on these items. With that, we'll go on to additional information in regards to the Freeman. And you'll see a lot of this information is pretty repetitive, so I won't cover it again. Groundwater extractions via direct extractions is down about 8%. And again, this is only Zone B, because we're dealing with the Freeman. Groundwater in lieu of extractions, we've covered that information previously. There is a proposed rate increase of about 27.22%, and notices were mailed in compliance with Prop 218. They were mailed on April 24th, and the district, again, went beyond its legal requirement and published a notice of a public hearing on April 24th in the Ventura County Star. The extraction charges are listed here for M&I. They're going from 54 to 68.7, and for ag, they're being proposed at increasing to 22.9 from $18.
Maintaining the 3-to-1 ratio minimum requirement.
That is correct. Okay. Additional information, while there is a replacement cost component within the budget, when we're dealing with ending fund balance, we are decreasing that to in essence meet our reserve requirement without having to increase the rates any further than the 27% that's already being recommended. There is also $50,000 being again designated for legal reserves, and we are using some of the monies previously designated to cover some of our capital improvement projects. And as you're going to see in all the other funds, we are again including funding for the other post-employment obligations of the district.
It is required.
It is an obligation of the district, and we have the board has elected to fund that. As you may recall, that decision was made last fall. That concludes the Freeman Fund. Now, to the OH, the Oxnard-Hueneme Pipeline Fund. You'll see here that in terms of revenues, 95% is based off deliveries, and some very minimal other revenues make up this fund. As far as expenditures go, the one area I wanted to cover was the 54% item there, which is your operating expenses. Now, out of that 54%, that really represents about $2.2 million. 90% of that $2.2 million is made up of 4 line items. Those 4 line items include 60% of that $2.2 million is your utility costs for operating the system. Another 13% is for maintenance. 8% is for contractual services, and 7% is for chemicals used to treat the water. So again, while that line item or that category may seem pretty significant, and it is, I wanted to show that in reality, there is, again, very little discretion, absent some significant changes such as possibly a solar power project that might diminish the utility needs of this enterprise. At this point, there's very little that staff can do to reduce the most significant cost area within this fund. Getting down to the cash flow, we're estimating a beginning fund balance of about $760,000. As you can see, the activity generated throughout the year adds about $300,000 to that fund balance. Ending fund balance of a little bit over $1 million. The reserve goal based on the OH contract is a little bit over, again, $1 million. So the reserve goal here is right within proximity of that goal. Doesn't quite meet it, but it's very close. In terms of additional information in regards to the Oxnard-Hueneme pipeline, we've talked about deliveries. Depreciation is not being set aside. It is included within the budget detail pages, but for budgetary purposes, it is being excluded when we came up with the actual expenditures, because this is on a cash flow basis. Okay.
Your 4% decrease, is that involved with the urgency process with Fox Canyon?
Yes, and as well as current year projections. But yes, the ordinance C was taken into account.
How many OH users are there?
I want to say there
We
is,
have 13 turnout zones, and 6 of those belong to city lights.
thank you. As was previously mentioned, we held a OH users meeting on April 30th. One of the items that was discussed during that meeting was the elimination of the lowering and rehabilitation of well number 8. That is included as one of the capital outlay projects within this budget. That represents about $110,000. At this point, I have just confirmed that we do intend on not including that project within the budget. So our figures here will be revised. What that represents is about a $10 decrease in rate overall. That can so we can minimize the rate by about $10 from what's being presented today by eliminating that project.
Excuse me. You must have just learned it because I didn't hear about it yesterday, so.
We talked about this. That was well that was drilled in 1956 for us to put $110,000 into a well that we're probably going to replace in the next 5 years under the OH well replacement program. So
Okay.
Does not make a lot of sense to our customers.
Okay, I just.
Okay, and yes,
Okay, so when we come back in June, we'll have the new rates with that project out, okay?
correct.
So you think the number, it'll change 10 across the board, or in the variable rate, marginal rate? What do you think the change will be?
That would be in the variable rate.
In the variable
So
rate,
the variable rate probably in the neighborhood of $302, we'll say.
somewhere in there.
Okay.
Okay. Again, the other project included that may or may not impact, that may impact the rates here proposed is the iron and manganese project. There is $139,000 included in this budget. I understand there's still discussions in terms of whether or not the OH users want to proceed with this project or not. So when we come back to you on June 10th, we will hopefully have a final response on that. Or you'll be able to hear today or at the next public hearing on this matter.
Yeah, and the reason we're working it that way is the district, the purpose of the OH system is to put the pumping in the forebay and not down near the coast, close to the seawater intrusion. We don't need iron manganese for that purpose, but the folks using that water, it's clogging up filters and causing other problems. So if they can't deal with it at their system, we want to fix it at ours, or if they want to say, we'll figure it out at our system, then we'll let them do it.
So that concludes the Oxnard-Hueneme pipeline budget. In regards to the Pleasant Valley pipeline, as you can see, revenues and expenditures here pretty much match each other. Our revenue sources, while it says deliveries, there really are no water deliveries. What it's comprised of is the $30,000 per month fixed charge that Pleasant Valley pays. That's what generates the $360,000 here represented. In the other revenue category, that's the 37%. That is a note receivable that again Pleasant Valley pays the district for obligations that the district incurred on its behalf. In regards to the expenditure side, they're pretty self-explanatory. 40% is existing debt service, which is in essence matching your revenue coming in there on the other category. And
I think for this, for Craig and Dave in particular, Craig, this is consistent with what we spoke with you recently when Robert and Lynn and I and others got together with you and John Broom, that if we hadn't done that 30,000 charge per month, that ending balance that says 412 would be 100,000, well below that reserve requirement. It says a reserve goal, but that's the agreement figure that we all agreed to, the minimum requirement. So we're staying below that, but without that fixed cost, we'd be in trouble. Now, cash flow would be a real problem for us.
yes, so took the words right out of my mouth, so.
Sorry.
It's okay. No. And so, again, nothing really different here other than rate changes are not being recommended for the PVP system. Pumping trough pipeline. Again, you'll notice revenues not quite enough to cover current year activity. And that's being addressed by the beginning fund balance being projected here. In terms of revenues, almost 100% is coming from deliveries. Now, on the expenditure side, the 45% there representing operating expenses, very similar to the OH system. About 90% of those expenditures equal about $705,000. 90% of those are, again, within 4 line items. Those line items are utilities, which make up 53% of that, maintenance, which represents 22%, 8% for contractual services, and another 6% for chemicals. So, again, yes.
In your budget packet here, you're talking about a fixed charge of about $800 per month on each turnout for the PTP system. Yet your revenues is showing that's deliveries. Is there another source of revenue that's not included in there, or is that fixed charge part of deliveries?
It is part of deliveries.
We're going to show that to you in a second, Robert.
Yes, but it is part of deliveries. Revenues generated in essence from deliveries, although we are in agreement, they're not really being delivered.
It's the delivery
system. Yes.
Can we ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of consistent through all the different budgets, but what's the reduction in employee benefits? It's pretty significant.
We paid off you know how Tina's been talking about, we paid off the per side fund. The board authorized that. When we paid that off, our percentage that we have to pay on each employee dropped from 22 to 16% because we paid this off up front. So we're reducing how much we have to pay. For every dollar we pay an employee, instead of paying 22 cents, we only have to pay 16 cents. And that only occurred when the board authorized us last month to pay off sort of the unfunded liability, a portion of the unfunded liability. So we're just seeing a reduction in our PERS rates for employees.
But I think in total it's like, it was $5 million.
It's district-wide. It's for all the employees.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like a large percent.
Yeah.
2.2, where you notice?
Well, I just got it off here. It's
Maybe
Page 20?
Or page 18's got it.
18, okay.
Yeah. Your employee benefits projected going from 5.1 to 2.5.
So a little over 3 million, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
And that's the big reduction, was just dropping that percentage.
Actually, you're looking at prior year to current year, not the current year initially proposed May 1st to the current figures now. You're looking from prior year. What that was is we did make a $1.3 million payment in September, if I'm not mistaken, for that. And now we are anticipating the other is it about $600,000. So that accounts for the difference. It's
Yeah,
the
they're big chunks of payments than the percentage, so
Yes.
a couple of years, we had to make those per side fund payments that are showing in there.
So that was a $2 million, and now there is a reduction in the rate. Okay?
We made a board policy to get that liability off the books and pay that off because it incurs expenses, the interest rates and a whole bunch of things.
Like 8%, and plus, if you're paying 22 versus 16, as the salary goes up, you're now paying 22% on a higher salary versus 16, so there's savings along the way.
Thank you.
Okay, and so, let me try to remember where I left off. Okay, so I think we pretty much covered the PTP system budget. Again, want to point out that the ending balance here being projected is consistent within the reserve goal of $250,000 to $300,000. Now, as far as the additional information goes, water deliveries pretty much in essence mirror what we're projecting this year. The permanent rate structure change that's being proposed is a new monthly fee of about $800 per fixed per turnout every month. And that allows us to decrease the O&M charge for the water being delivered from $220 to $135 per acre foot. Now, going to the fixed rate in terms of how we determined what that fixed rate was. This is one of the only sections of this presentation that where the figures have not been updated to reflect the current proposed budget. And the reason it wasn't updated is because then I wouldn't be able to demonstrate to you how we arrived at the recommended figure of $800 per month per turnout. Okay? That said, if we were to update this information, what it represents is it represents about a $15 savings per month per turnout. So instead of $800, it would be $785. Okay? So within operating the PTP system, as previously mentioned, there are some costs that will be incurred regardless of whether a single drop of water goes through the system or not. Those costs are really broken down into 5 categories here. You've got personnel costs of about $62,000 because, as Mike Alice has mentioned, there is still personnel needed to maintain the pipelines and to do various tasks related with the pipeline.
And that includes just that we have to send a guy around every month to read the meters. That's a fixed cost.
A little more than that, but
Yep.
okay.
What's
That's
that?
a little more than that.
Yes,
though,
yes.
For $63,000
Yes.
a year.
Oh, no, I'm saying part of it. I said
Yes.
part of that.
Okay.
I said
Okay.
part of that.
Okay.
I'll do it for 30.
I'll do it for 10.
I'll ride my bicycle around. Give me a key.
5 meters.
Again, part of it is that we have to read the meters on a monthly basis.
You still have to keep utilities on to these wells and to the facilities there. So we are taking about 10% of the utilities for the year. That's what we estimate represents the fixed component.
It's the standby cost, the
This-
electrical standby cost.
There is also maintenance, periodic maintenance that needs to take place to keep the system functional. We believe that's about $62,000 a year. Then there's the overhead component that each year is based on the prior year's data in regards to the activity for the fund. And again, it's based on a pre-approved formula that includes the number of billings, the labor hours devoted to this fund, the payable transactions, and the revenue.
That's the overhead methodology or allocation that I talked about earlier.
Yes. And then there's the debt obligation of about $100,000. And again, those costs will be due regardless of whether we have any water to deliver or not. That totals to close to $596,000. Okay, so that is the cost that we are recommending be recovered in a fixed fee from the benefactors of the system, which in our minds is those that are served by the system or that have the potential to be served by the system. So in determining how to best recover that $596,000, two options were considered. One is the flat fee per turnout, and I try to work through the math there. The $596,000 divided by 62 turnouts is about $9,600 per year, divided by the 12 months, comes out to about $800. Okay? Second was, okay, what if we did a flat fee per turnout based on the meter size? There are 12 meters with that have 6-inch meters, 39 8-inch, and 11 10-inch meters. Broke down that cost based on inches, based on meter size. It turns out about $600 for a 6-inch, $800 for an 8-inch, and $1,000 for a 10-inch.
The reason we chose this is the cost that Tina just showed you earlier had nothing to do with meter size and the amount of water going through. It's the overall system, not the size of the meter, that affects the costs.
Correct. And also, you know, those meters are located in various positions on the PTP pipeline. And we've installed orifice plates on a lot of those, so 10-inch turnout isn't really a 10-inch turnout anymore. So it kind of averages out, so that's why she's looking at those options that she has.
So
the last option,
okay.
acres.
Yeah, I just moved on to this one because the discussion started going into determining the factors that really brought forward our decision in terms of our recommendation, and so I just kind of wanted to point these out here.
Do that, and I'll talk about the acres.
Okay, and so thank you for saving me my breath here. And the only point pretty much not covered was just the simplicity in the fee structure of having a flat fee for all turnouts. Mm-hmm. But all others items in terms of the reasons for our recommendation was previously addressed here.
As far as the acres, we did not consider that, and it was brought up, I guess, at several meetings on the Oxnard Plain. Folks talked about it. We didn't do that because the meters serve certain acres, but those numbers of acres can change. They can serve different parcels. The water can be moved to other areas, and the confusion of trying to keep track of that and who to bill and the billing for that made no sense at all. The fixed charge, the flat fee, the way we put together by turnout. What we're trying to cover with the fixed cost is just the system to be ready to serve, not how much it serves. And acres served is very similar to the meter size. That has nothing to do with the fixed cost. It's just that the system has to be ready to serve. So we didn't even go there. We thought that complicated the system way too much. And so we're recommending the flat fee per turnout. As Tina said, with the change, we could drop it to $785 before we come back to June. I would not recommend it because as you go back a couple of page screens to the bar chart, we're right in the middle between the reserve goal and that 15 would just put us up to near the top end of the reserve, and it doesn't make sense to not do that at this point. But you could direct us to drop it to 785 or even lower. Or if you don't like our allocation system, direct us to do it differently. But we believe the flat rate on a turnout makes sense for what we're considering the fixed cost.
You have to remember historically, the turnout size wasn't determined on acres, it was determined on the well replacement that they were going into service. So if you had a 6-inch, 8 or 10-inch based on the well replacement that was being done for the turnout, which also indirectly has to do with the size of the operation of the ranch or the parcel it's irrigating.
Right. But that size of that ranch and stuff does not affect the standby utility costs of 5 wells. Just, basically idling 5 wells and that cost, having that available, number of acres, and that's, Dan, that's why we made that.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is, go back to the other screen with me, Tina.
Sure.
What I'm trying to point out is the process of the historical part of the PT system. Not everybody could pick what they wanted. They got a 6-inch turnout, 8 or 10 based on the well that they're being asked to stop using. So that's not the right. So if anything, I would lean towards, my personal opinion, I would lean towards choice number 2 versus 1. I understand the idea of a flat rate. Maybe it's not a big deal or the end of the world. But realistically, the turnout size, unless the Orpheus thing has a huge difference in this process, the idea was the turnout size was designed for the well replacement.
I think part of the problem is no matter how you divide the pie, 1, 2, or 3, there's flaws in every one of the logic. I mean, on an acre basis, you could say, well, wait a minute. That's a high water usage crop. That's a low water usage crop. Why am I? Okay, so we go there. I don't think there is a perfect answer to this equation. I think the fundamental statement is that there is a fixed cost component of maintaining a system that right now is in a holding pattern, not because of anything the growers have done, not anything because United has done, but because the weather pattern we have has put us in that. We will eventually come out of that weather pattern and the whole system will be up and running again. But to maintain that system in place while we wait for that weather pattern to change, the PTP system was set up to pay for its own way, and the policy of the board has been not to subsidize that PTP system.
That's a great point.
It's a cost of doing business to the PTP system, not unlike the cost of doing business to PV, which has a system that for years we've delivered water. We're not doing that now for a variety of reasons. The OH system has a fixed cost. So if we're going to run it as a system that is designed to supplement when water is available, and that system needs to be ready to go, it has to pay its own way. So I think we could spend hours trying to figure out if 1, 2, or 3 is fair. I think what we have to do is say they're all in the same range of numbers. I agree with Dan, the historical reason why the turnouts were 6, 8, and 10, I think led a lot of discussion to get away from the discussion we're in now. If you got a big well, you get a big turnout. Little well, you get a little turnout. That solves that problem. Going forward, my vote, my personal opinion, and we're not voting on anything right now, obviously, I got to be careful there, is staff's recommendation is which one?
Staff's recommendation is the first one.
Okay.
The flat.
If I may clarify a little bit, Director Nauman's point is that's very traditional to charge your service charge based upon your service size. So if you have 2-inch meters versus 10-inch meters, there's a huge difference between those. But I think what Mike Ellis pointed out is the meter size is not directly correlated with capacity. So over time, operational staff has modified these turnouts so the meter size doesn't really represent anything anymore. It started with something 30 years ago, and they've tried to equalize them. So dependent upon elevation, and system, they've put orifice plates to essentially equalize all of those.
So one big meter
So-
could turn on and basically shut
Right.
down other
So,
meters.
so a 10-inch doesn't have any more capacity today than does a 6-inch, and depending upon where they are in the system. So I was a proponent of number 2, and after reviewing the reality of how the system works today, I swung my opinion back to 1, because they're essentially equal capacity at this point. So that's sort of the background behind
Well,
that.
that's interesting. I assume, my mistake then, because I understood the Orchard's plates were put in place so that you have a 50-foot variation between the top and bottom of the line. There was help pressurized so those on the bottom didn't get everything and those on top still got something.
It is, but you also see a larger draw if there was not an orifice plate down on the bottom to maybe somebody's neighbor down on that same section. So it kind of equalizes that flow to those customers along that section.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, one thing Lynn said, and I think I want to reiterate, none of these funds, pipeline funds, are subsidized by Zone A or Zone B charge. In fact, those pipelines help us to achieve our mission of protecting the groundwater and preventing or trying to mitigate seawater intrusion. In addition to paying these charges that Tina's just talked about, for every water that's delivered, those people, those customers also have to pay the Zone A and Zone B charge that go directly to the General Water Conservation Fund or the Freeman Fund. So there is no subsidizing at all. There's no transferring of money or sharing of money or anything. We have a clear accounting system that makes each fund pay for itself.
No, that's the way it's been.
Yeah.
Quick question on the 62 turnouts. Of the 62, how many are very low water use? So say you use they call it 10 acre feet threshold, or 50 acre feet. What's the low end, the very low end of the water use, or 0? How many of the 62 fit that description?
I'd say about 10% or low use, 10% high use, and then you got, it's similar to the spread that we have here in Madison. You see about 10% low, 10% high, and the rest are average use.
And by low you mean 0 or a few acre feet? Or
There's a couple that did 0, but a few acre
And James, the key to that, maybe where you're going is, they may not be using water when it's available, but it's still available for them to be used. It's basically almost a standby charge. It's available if they need it.
Paul, you got a question?
Yeah, a couple of things. Is there a fear that
Hold on, guys.
deliveries are going to go down and this is a way to mitigate that? Or
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't hear what you said. Could you start over?
is there a fear that their deliveries or demand is going to go down and this is a way of mitigating that? Or what was the reasoning of what I've already heard behind just staying with a 220 or 230 or 200?
There's two reasons behind it, Paul. Number one is, yes, because of surface water and because of the ability of the 5 wells to deliver enough, the water deliveries are lower. Normally, we average about 8,200 acre feet a year to the PTP system. As you saw, I think it's like 42.
47.
So there's less. It's like any water system, as we're all going to see very soon. As water conservation comes in, the less water we use, the higher the rates are going to go up because the fixed costs are still there and have to be taken care of. So that's the first answer. The second answer is, even when deliveries return to normal, it makes more sense to make sure those fixed costs are dealt with. Everybody's paying equally for those fixed costs. And then if somebody's a big user, they pay, well, it's a lower rate, more of the delivery cost to cover the extra utilities and things like that than the people that use less. So the people that use more are going to end up paying more. And that's not a Prop 218 issue because this is a contractual system and doesn't deal with it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
And also looking ahead at maybe some unintended consequences of a rate like this. The larger users, or even say some of the 0 users, of which I am one, maybe up to 3 turnouts currently, 0 use. When you drop the commodity charge so low, I mean, not that I want higher rates, but you might place more demand on that system during the peak, during some times, because now you're competing with the cost of well water. So just understand that.
Right. And we still think that this system provides, versus you pumping your well, it's better for us to do those wells than the wells you're using.
Right.
Yeah.
So
But we understand that, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Correct.
I'm sorry, Greg.
This is going to be an ongoing charge.
That
If
is,
the board authorizes it, that's the plan, to keep this as a permanent, a fixed cost and a delivery cost, and we may look at that in the future for PV also.
So your water rate should be a lot lower than they have.
The actual delivery charges, yes.
The variable rate, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and there was talk that this was done because there's a lot of new turnouts that have to be replaced and such.
No. As you saw, the cost that we listed there had nothing to do with replacement cost or anything like that.
So what about that then?
We're not replacing all those wells at one time. We're doing a few
No,
a
I'm
year.
talking about the turnouts.
Is that in that maintenance cost that's in there?
yes.
Repairing.
Turnouts, but that's just an ongoing maintenance.
So that's part of this maintenance cost, or part of operation cost.
I think it's part of the delivery charge. Yeah.
We're not going to be hit with another charge for that.
No, that's part of the cost, these two costs.
That's inclusive.
Yeah, yes. That's the maintaining of the system, keep it ready to operate. Is that clear? Because I know that the PTP, the fixed charge, has created a lot of stir out on the Oxnard Plain. Is everybody okay now? They at least understand it. Not okay, but got it. Okay.
Okay,
time out.
let me, Tina, if I may, in the sake of being humane here in this operation, let's turn the lights on.
Okay.
I'm going to take a 15-minute break.
Okay.
Let people stretch their legs, and then we'll continue
So
on.
Lynn, can we say we'll start back at 10:30?
10:30, okay? All right, 13-minute break, 10:30.